Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make melodic techno synths. As usual, you can find the project file and samples from this video in the description, and yeah, let's dive in. So, I'm going to go layer by layer here. The first layer is this little pluck sound. So the way that I made this was basically in operator. It actually sounds kind of like a saw wave pluck to me, but it's a little bit more complex. So the way that I made it was basically I started with a sine wave, and then I did a little bit of FM, with some other sine waves, sort of achieve this type of sound. So I'll show you what it sounds like before any effects and before the filter. So you can hear it already kind of has that sort of like plucky sound to it, even before the filter. And so the way that I achieved this was basically, I used the LFO, it's on 16th notes, it's also on the filter, but I have it on the volume of the sound. So that's how we're getting this pluck, and then I have this kind of like fast sort of melody thing that's just playing. It's just doing like an arpeggio with an F minor chord, F, G sharp, and C. So yeah, so then after that I have the filter on there, and then the LFO is also controlling the cutoff of that. And then that is going into this chorus, which is set to be pretty subtle. You can see I have a pretty fair amount and then just a short rate, or a slow rate. And that's kind of the way I like to set these up. It just makes it a little bit more like textural and less just sort of like fast chorus. So after that, I have a ping pong delay. Pretty straightforward. I have the dry wet pretty low and a pretty good amount of feedback time, and it's on 16 notes. That kind of, you can hear it, that's pretty subtle, but it just gives everything this nice sort of echo. And then after that, I just have a little bit of reverb, just for atmosphere. So the next layer here is this little respace, which sounds like this. And so the way I made this was also with operator, but I'm not doing any FM synthesis. So if we go into this little tab, you can see the FM algorithm that I used was just the one where the oscillators are playing side by side. I don't want to say playing in unison because I don't want to misuse that language. But yeah, they're playing side by side, and essentially what we have going on here is it's just two saw waves. The second one is I have the fine turned up a little bit, so it's a little bit detuned. I'll show you before any effects and before the filter. So you can hear that is kind of what it sounds like. And then I have that going into a low pass filter, which sounds like this. So obviously that's what cuts off all the high end and makes it like that kind of like deep, resonant, bassy sound. And then after that, I have a little bit of chorus because I like my respaces to be a little bit more stereo. I feel like it just makes them more interesting because, like, it's very easy to just make, two saw waves, detune one, and then put it through a low pass. But when you add the chorus, it just kind of gives it a little bit of, like, more space and I guess more stereo width, which may not be the best thing for bass. But in this case, I'm kind of casual about it because I feel like it just doesn't really matter. Like, this still is a powerful and strong bass. And even if we put it into mono, it would still work, I believe, as well. Yeah, so you can see it just sounds a little bit more warbly. So then after that, I have a saturator, which is actually like somewhat extreme, intense, I guess, is the word I would use. Because I have the drive up pretty high, and then I played around with the analog clip. This just adds a little bit of like crunch on top of the sound. You can hear it feels almost like it's like trying to push through. Like if it pushes through a little bit more, it's gonna be very distorted, or even just like a little bit over distorted. But right now it's at the point where it's sort of neutral. It's just adding that little bit of crunch and grit, and yeah. So then the next thing we have here is this little pad, which sounds like this. And so the way I made this one was with analog. It's one saw wave and a little bit of white noise, and those are going into a low pass filter, which has no envelope. And then I'm controlling the frequency a little bit with the LFO1 actually. So essentially the technique here is if you put like a kind of slow LFO on this filter frequency, and you don't do it too high, like you can see I have it on 0.36 there, so pretty low. What you get is just this constantly fluctuating kind of like more interesting sound, you know? Like you can hear it sort of moving, whereas if I turn off that LFO, it's cool, but it's a little bit just sort of static in the background. Like, what is it really, it's not really changing, it's not really moving at all, so it's just a nice way to add some movement without having to sit there and automate the filter frequency a million times. One thing I like to think about is, like, you want to set your stuff up and, like, your tracks up to sort of, like, get stuff like this, like movement and just interesting textures and cool sounds, more as a result of, like, not happy accidents, but things like this that aren't very precise. So, like, what I mean by this is essentially you can kind of approach this two ways, right? You could approach it from saying, like, from the point of view of, like, okay, I'm going to automate this filter frequency, and I'm just going to sort of, like, do it very subtly, and it's going to create this cool kind of randomness. Or you could say, I'm just going to put the LFO on the filter frequency, and then just sort of set it kind of low, and then it's going to keep creating randomness again, because it will be somewhat random, or it will sound random because it's constantly changing. But doing it this way, again, just sort of does it a little bit more, like, automatically, I guess, and it makes it a little bit easier because you're less focused on, like, trying to synthesize something that should be organic, essentially, and more just sort of going with the flow and, like, adding things and just make things sound cool, which I think we can all agree is a much better way to produce music. So after that, I have this vibrato in there, which is just giving it a little bit of pitch fluctuation. It's subtle, but it's just kind of in there, and you can hear it. So then after that, I have a little bit of reverb, nothing too much, just gives it some space. And then I have that going into a saturator, which you can see I actually kind of went in on here. So we have a bit of drive, and I have the bass frequency turned down and the depth turned down as well. And so that's just beefing it up. I like putting it after the reverb because it can make the reverb sound kind of cool as well when it rings out. Like, sometimes the reverb will distort a little bit, or even just, like, the gain boost that it gets from the saturator can make the reverb sound kind of cool. So then after that, I have this EQ8, which is just cutting out some low end. This sound has kind of a lot of low end, so you can hear. It's just fitting it into the spot where it fits, essentially. So the notes for this are pretty simple. I just want to talk about them real quick. It's just an F minor chord because this thing is in F minor, and the chord progression kind of goes like C sharp, D sharp, and then F minor. So I just have this playing the F minor, and that's just sort of hanging over top of everything. So then the last sound here is this little FM lead, which sounds like this. So the way I made this was basically with operator, since it's FM, and what it is it is 3 sine waves, except for the second one, I kind of played around with the harmonics a little bit. So I'll show you. So here's just like a regular sine wave in operator. You can see it just has that one harmonic here. These little lines here are all harmonics. And on the third one, you can see it's also just a sine wave. But on the second one, I drew in these 2 harmonics. And you can see this is kind of how the waveform is shaped now. In operator, if you draw in these harmonics, if you pay attention to this, you can see it changes that waveform and it allows you to kind of see, like, what you're doing. So I added these 2. And since this is FM synthesis, that made a pretty big change to the sound. It just kind of makes it a little bit more harmonic. You can hear now, to me, honestly, it kind of sounds almost like a guitar or something, which I thought was cool. Whereas if we just turn this back to a regular sine wave, it's a little bit more bland. So yeah, those extra harmonics just add some kind of cool tones to the sound. And then what I did here was I turned the chorus pitch on that one up 1, so it's at 2. It's an octave up from the first one. And then I put the chorus pitch of the third one down to 0.5. And then on the last thing is on the third one, I have a pretty short envelope here. It's really just adding to, like, the transient of the sound, so sort of like that click at the start. If I turn that off and then back on. So yeah, you can hear that's mostly just adding to the click kind of part of the sound, but it's pretty crucial. So then I didn't do anything else inside of operator, but after that I added a saturator, which is really not doing too much. You can see I just have the drive at 4, so that's just adding a little bit of crunch to the sound. and I feel like it adds texture and sort of depth. And then after that, I just have this echo, which is doing 16th notes. But you can see the two ears are not synced, and you can see on the right ear, I actually have it on dotted 16th notes. Then the regular one is just straight 16th notes. So this is a good way to give it like some stereo width without going too deep. All I really had to do was this, and then it gives it a big stereo image because of the fact that these aren't playing the same thing. So it draws more attention to it, and your ears notice it more, or your brain notices it more. So then I have a little bit of reverb in there, and then the dry wet is just set like that. So that's really it for this one. So yeah, so make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. Make sure to check out the sample pack from this video as well. My social media is across the screen. Thank you again, everybody, for watching this tutorial, and I will see you again tomorrow.